Hey everyone, Reed Hendricks with Valor Ridge. In this video, we're going to talk about Patriots Day and what it meant for our nation. Today's April 19th. This is one of my all-time favorite days in our nation's history because it happened on April 19th, 1775. This is when the shot heard around the world was fired to start the American Revolution. So we need to teach the young children this story that our forefathers in this country, when it came to confiscation of firearms, when it came to gun control, our forefathers stood their ground. They were unwilling to disperse. They stood in the face of tyranny, armed and ready and willing to fight on that day. And this is a story that we need to tell the younger people in this country because they think, oh, the American Revolution was started because of taxation. No, that's not why the American Revolution was started. That's when the grumblings began. That's when animosity against the Crown and Parliament began. But what actually started the American Revolution were the British Redcoats, the British regular army, ordered by their general, who was ordered by his superiors in Parliament to disarm the colonial militia in the countryside. Obviously, before this, there had been a long time, 10 to 12 years of animosity between the colonists and the Parliament and Crown of Great Britain. And yes, there had been taxes, there was protests, there were things that were going on like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts and the Intolerable Acts. And the colonists tolerated this for the most part. Yes, they dumped the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773. Yes, they tolerated British troops being quartered in their houses and acts like that. In the city of Boston, you had Patriots and Tories that lived side by side with one another. The Patriots, of course, wanted their rights restored as Englishmen. The Tories, of course, supported the Crown and Parliament. And we have these groups of people that lived right next door to one another and interacted with each other on a daily basis. In other words, you had diametrically opposed views on how the government should be and how their lives should be led. And when you have a group of people that are fully supporting the Crown, you have another group of people who wanted their rights restored, especially the Sons of Liberty, like Paul Revere and Samuel Adams and John Hancock and individuals like that. This is where the story gets interesting. See, the colonial militia had been training for years. They foresaw a fight coming. They knew what was going to happen. They knew that eventually they were going to have to restore their rights as Englishmen with force of arms. They understood that. That's why the militia from one end of the continent to the other were drilling, we're training, we're preparing. And when you have a group of people in the city of Boston, not all of them supported the Crown, as I already said. And one of those groups of people were known as the Sons of Liberty. And in the Sons of Liberty, they were very outspoken against the Crown's policies. They were very outspoken against unjust taxation, and they were very outspoken against being forced to buy things against their will. For example, the tea from the East India Company. Early in the morning on April 19th, 1775, this is when the Redcoats were beginning to go out of Boston, the one if by land, two if by sea, by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And we used to read that poem when I was in grade school. When I was in elementary school, we read that poem, and it was always a fascinating story. And what you have is you had a network of people to pass messages on to the militia. And this, of course, were members of the Sons of Liberty, most notably Paul Revere. Now, there were 3 men that night that rode out into the Massachusetts countryside to warn the colonial militia that the British regulars were coming. You had Paul Revere, of course, you had William Dawes and Samuel Prescott. Now, a couple of these guys were captured. People don't understand this, or maybe they not have heard this, but Paul Revere was actually captured on that ride. He was intercepted by a patrol of Redcoats. William Dawes also did not complete his leg of the journey. The only one that made it through unscathed was Samuel Prescott. Now, upon hearing this, the militia at Lexington assembled. Numbers vary as to how many people were actually there, but the lowest number I've researched is 70. The highest number is 200. So needless to say, it was a very small group of people going against the British regulars that were marching there. John Parker, of course, was in charge of the militia in Lexington. He organized his forces. The rumor has it that there was a pub nearby, at which point they gained a little liquid courage and assembled and stood at the main road where the British were supposed to pass through. They were assembled. They were in formation, at which point the British arrived. And the command, of course, was "Disperse ye rebels." Now, this is a watershed moment in history because had they complied, had they decided, you know what, we're just going to disperse, we'll let them do what they needed to do. And by the way, the mission of the Redcoats was to disarm the militia and take all of their muskets, their powder and their musket balls and their cannon. Yes, they did have cannon, and also to take some of their food supplies. That was their mission. Of course, we know the story. We know that the colonial militia refused to disperse. They refused. They stood their ground. They stood tyranny in the face, and they defied the most powerful empire in the world on this day. Nobody really knows who fired first. There are conflicting accounts. Some people say the British fired first. Some people say that the colonials fired first. This is why trigger finger discipline is important. Some of those flintlocks, when you had that trigger, if you touched it, it would go off. We really don't know. It doesn't matter who fired first, because that was the shot heard around the world. That was the first shots fired of the American Revolution. Of course, the colonists eventually did scatter, because the British stood and they're very disciplined at what they did. And of course the Redcoats continued on to Concord. Now at Concord it was a much different story. Word had passed around in that countryside that yes, there had been shots fired at Lexington, so boys, we better prepare for a fight. And boy, did they sure do that at Concord. There's a Battle of Northbridge, one of the most famous battles in American history. It was at this point where the British were funneled into a bridge, and they were roundly heavily induced casualties on their side. Now eventually they did occupy the town at Concord, but on the way back to Boston, this is where the hornet's nest got kicked up. Because on the way back to Boston, that entire day, they were harassed, shot at, and sustained heavy casualties from the colonial militia. People from all around that rural place got involved in the fight and fought the Redcoats all the way back to Boston. And in fact, there were as many as 10,000 to 15,000 militia surrounding Boston at the end of this day, at which point the British were effectively under siege in their own fortress. Ladies and gentlemen, there are modern Redcoats among us right now. There are modern Redcoats that would forcibly disarm the American public if given power, or at least they would attempt to. It wouldn't go over very well. But there are modern Redcoats right now. Individuals I'll name directly, people like Representative Swalwell, who said he would put gun owners in jail if they didn't comply with his confiscation order. You ain't a dictator, dude. You ain't a dictator. You're nothing. You're some dirtbag from California who has no bearing on our lives whatsoever. I'm talking about people like Dianne Feinstein. I'm talking about people like Kamala Harris, like the front runner of the Democrat Party right now, Socialist Bernie Sanders. These are the modern Redcoats above us. They want big government. They want gun control. They want high taxation. They are the modern Redcoats. And we're looking at them having to spew off all their knowledge. And it's important for the young people in this nation to know that those ideas are anti-American. Their views on politics are un-American. They are completely out of step with American history. And quite honestly, they are invalid and unworkable in our constitutional republic. So here it is, April 19th, 2019. And I wanted to share that story with you. If you found the information in this video helpful, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to learn how to use your firearms for self-defense of your family, your home, your state, and your country, come on out to Valor Ridge and we can help you with that. This is Reed Hendricks of Valor Ridge reminding you the lessons that we learn are written on the tombstones of others. We'll see you on the ridge.